Welcome to Unit 2, Navigating Research Culture, Section 3, Researcher Roles and Responsibilities. So in the previous sections, we learned about the research ecosystem, so the offices and professionals beyond researchers with whom data management librarians interact and collaborate. And we learned about the types of research teams and the type of research going on within our institutions. In this section, we learn about the researchers themselves, their roles and their responsibilities. And you can see from these learning objectives, we're trying to differentiate among different roles within the lab so that we can target our outreach activities, our engagement activities as data management librarians. We're going to start with the principal investigator, or the PI. Commonly, the PI is thought of the leader of a lab or research group. And as such, they're the person ultimately responsible for complying with all the laws and the institution's policies. And at the same time, they have a lot of responsibilities in terms of administrative duties, keeping their labs running, so the oversight of the budgets and the personnel within the lab, the financials, etc. But there's also human activities in that they're mentoring graduate students. They're helping they might have a fellow in the lab whom they're writing recommendation letters for to help that person get a permanent position. And then there's other duties that are not necessarily related to the research, but writing up the research or writing grants. And so we've learned about the Office of Sponsored Projects that helps researchers to get federal or private foundation funding to keep their labs and research running. A co-investigator or a co-I or sub-I is similar to a PI in that, as we learned about science being collaborative, we might have a grant in which there is one individual who's being the principal investigator on that award, and then that award is a collaborative project. So there are several labs that are working as part of that funded project. And so the investigators of each of those individual labs might be a co-investigator. So it's very common to have an investigator in a lab serving as a PI on one award or a co-I on several other awards. And so in that shared responsibility for complying with federal laws and regulations, there's also an extra burden of project management because they're sort of working as part of a team with other teams, and they want to make sure that they're managing the project within their site and responsible for the integration of those data with the larger project. Postdoctoral fellows, or postdocs. Unfortunately, sometimes we hear the term postdoctoral student, but postdocs are actually not students. They have graduated, they have their PhDs, and they're actively looking for a permanent position. So the NIH, for example, has a special award called a K Award that they award to postdoctoral fellows so that they can generate data that they can then roll into an R01 as an independent investigator. So these are limited term positions. They're in a lab or research group. They're working with their advisor, their mentor, the PI in the lab, but they might also be working on their own independent research at the same time. And since they have their PhD and they are professionals, they also serve as research advisors for graduate students or undergraduates who might be doing research in the lab. Students are an important part of the research group, and there are PhD students and master's students who are working as research assistants, so their funding for their degree is coming by working within their advisor's lab. So as such, they have responsibilities to work on their advisor's projects, and they need to manage their time because they're taking courses, they have a reading list to complete, they're taking qualifying exams. At the same time, they're working on their own thesis or dissertation project in order to gather the data to write and publish, or to write their dissertation, hopefully publish, and so that they can graduate. In addition to sort of the academics in the lab, there's also staff, including lab managers. So lab managers are very important because they're supporting the administrative duties of the PI. So there's a lot to keep track of in terms of managing personnel, managing budgets, managing inventory. And lab managers are really great partners with data management librarians because they have, in most cases, a wide knowledge of the data management practices going on within a lab. So if a research data management librarian is partnering with the lab manager, they can look to see if there are ways to improve the way that data is described or standardized in terms of file naming conventions or where data is stored. And they have this role where someone is new coming into the lab called onboarding, so they might be having that person trained, and so that's also an opportunity to collaborate with the data management librarian to help that person sort of start on the right foot in terms of managing his or her data. Lab technicians are also very important staff members because a lot of them have specialized training in some of the research instruments that are used in modern research. So the types of microscopes that are being used or spectrometers that require a great deal of knowledge and experience, and also protocols that are done in a lab, and having expertise in caring for the model organisms that might be utilized in that research. And so with that knowledge, many of them have advanced degrees, master's degrees or PhDs as well, and are knowledge sources. And data management librarians have an opportunity to partner with these individuals because many times they know the most about the data standards being used by those instruments and the data formats, the metadata that's commonly used with those, and the challenges that students have using those instruments or managing the data coming off those instruments. In the same way that there are lab managers for maybe basic science labs, there's clinical research coordinators who also run the day-to-day operations of a clinical trial. So many times these are healthcare professionals, so might have nursing degrees or medical degrees in certain cases. They're handling and overseeing the recruitment of human participants, screening them for whether or not they would be appropriate for the trial, and then helping to enroll and register them into the trial. And so they also have this responsibility to make sure that the trial is adhering to the protocol. So we learned about the IRB and the study protocol being reviewed by the IRB and approved by the IRB. And so if there's any sort of deviation from those protocols, they need to be reported to the IRB. A person who supports that role is the regulatory coordinator. And so as there's a lot of paperwork that's generated that have to do with the enrollment and registration of human participants that need to be secured, this individual helps track those compliance requirements. And there's an opportunity for data management librarians to partner with this individual, again, around the training. So when people are coming into a clinical trial, new students or fellows onboarding, as we mentioned before, there's an opportunity for them to learn about how these materials are managed. That brings us to the data in clinical trials. So in some cases, there might be a biostatistician, there might be a data analyst who has expertise in the study design and also working with encumbered data. So data that has to be protected because it contains personal information, indirect or direct identifiers, or it might be in a healthcare setting, and so there's protected health information that needs to be handled in a certain way. And with that expertise, they might have an interest in making sure that data is de-identified or anonymized before it's shared with other researchers, or if it's ultimately ever shared with the public. So when we look back again on this, the triangle that we saw in section 2 about evidence, we also have the data coming from these types of studies here informing policy. So the data that's generated from the clinical trials needs to be secured and managed in specific ways, and it also needs to be de-identified in certain ways or anonymized in certain ways. And so these professionals are real experts when data management librarians are interested in sharing this data or depositing it in repositories and making sure that there's not a risk to participants' confidentiality and privacy. So I hope you, in this section, have a better idea of who some of the researchers are with whom you will interact or with whom you are now interacting with.